Hey, this is Gary, Late Night V Twin. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to talk about saving your Harley Davidson M8 from disaster. We're going to go through all the installation, the reasons why this is important, big inherent problems with the M8 that I'm seeing here, oil sumping problems in the crankcase. I'm seeing lifter failures in the bores, breaking the cuffs. The engine is going to burn up and it's going to need repair. The reason those are happening, we've got a lifter failure that's taking place with the axle on the roller. As the lifter comes apart, sending metal through the motor, we're losing top ends, we're losing bottom ends. S&S has an upgrade for all these components we're going to be installing in this bike. They've got an upgraded oil pump, takes care of the swamping issues. We get a billet cam plate. It's a beautiful piece. A lot stronger than the factory cast piece. We also are putting in the premium lifters that don't have the failure rates that the stock lifters do. And then the last piece is the lifter cuffs. The lifter cuffs from Harley are made of plastic. I'm already seeing failures in those when the lifters twist under the tops of the cams when the axle fails. And they've got a billet cuff that goes in there that saves the lifters from rotating in their bores. Excellent products. They've really done their homework. A lot of engineering went into this. I think, in my opinion, the aftermarket always has built a better Harley Davidson than the motor company ever built. So we're going to install these pieces in this M8 to make it reliable again, to bring back the performance that's deserved from the investment that my customer made. And it's going to bring him peace of mind, and it's going to bring him longevity to the motor. With the M8 failures that we've seen, dealing with a dealer that's under warranty, when you go back, they're going to put the exact same parts that failed back in the cam chest. You have a choice. Do I make that decision and go back to what Harley has failures with? Or do you pay the dealer to do the upgrade for you with the S&S parts? So, at $200 an hour, $150 an hour, whatever it's going to be at the dealership, if you decide to do this, you are going to need a few special tools. Number one, you're going to need this lock tool. It's available from Screaming Eagle. It actually is the twin cam one that fits the Milwaukee 8. It is offered through the Harley Davidson catalog. Here it is right here, little cam gear tool. You'll actually see this in the video when we put the cam plate back in and we take it apart and torque it. The other thing that you're going to need is a high quality inch-pound torque wrench and a high quality foot-pound torque wrench. And this is a low one. This goes from 10 pounds to 140 pounds. I actually happen to use Snap-on tools. It's not an endorsement for Snap-on by any way, because it's a huge failure in this community with these bikes. And we're going to basically turn this Harley Davidson that basically ends up as a grenade into a Harley Davidson. It's going to be great. It's going to be reliable. It's going to be awesome. So we've removed the air cleaner, the right front driver's footboard, the exhaust. I've pulled the spark plugs and the bike is in high gear. I will explain the high gear procedure as we go through setting the push rods, removing them, and installing them. But right now we're going to get into the oil pump and the cam chest. All right, so now this is the cam chest. We've got the cam gear, the crank gear, the cam plate, and the oil pump is behind. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna pop the push rods out. They just, they come off with these little clips. They just take your screwdriver and you can just roll a clip out. This bike did have a stage 2 already done, so there are adjustable push rods in here, so we don't have to clip them out with a bolt cutter, which is great, saves a lot of time. So you can just roll this up and then it exposes the push rod so that we can loosen this up, collapse the push rod, and then roll them out. So I'm going to get these tubes off and we're going to get to it. So we're going to unlock the lock nut that's on the bottom, and then we will spin this nut down. And then we'll actually spin it up just a little bit. 5/16 wrench holds that. And then we can start collapsing our push rods. I would like to mention that because we've removed the spark plugs, the bike is in 6th gear, and I've rolled the engine over so that this cam on the front is at the very bottom of the lobes, so that that's the least amount of pressure. We'll have to roll the motor over as we go to the other cylinder, and I'll show you how the push rods move and how to tell that this is on the very bottom of the lobe so that you can remove them safely. Okay, so we get the push rod all the way down, and then we can remove it from the head. And there's our push rod too. Okay, so we've rolled the front push rods out. I want to show you how to roll the engine over so that we get these 2 push rods at the very bottom of the lobes. So I'll hold this up. I'm going to go back here. The bike is in 6th gear, and I'm going to roll the engine over, and you're going to see the push rods move up and down. They're going to cycle. And when both the push rods are down at the very lowest point where they're not moving anymore, that's where we want the cam and the lifters at the bottom of the lobe separation. So now we can safely take these 2 push rods out. Okay, so we're going to roll this exhaust valve push rod out. And we'll go into the intake one. 1/2-inch faces on the push rod and the lock nut. And then the push rod itself has a flat that's 5/16. And you just break the lock nut loose. Okay, so we've got the intake push rod loose, and we're going to pop that out. 3/16 ball socket Allen makes this really easy to get in here at odd angles so that we can remove these bolts, so we can pop these lifter blocks out. Okay, so the bolts were a little tough coming out. I did have to use just a standard angled Allen wrench to get them out. There are a lot of Loctite on them, so they were pretty tight. The S&S does include new bolts with the cuff kit and the gaskets, so we don't really have to worry about wadding these bolts up like I did trying to get them out, because they are going to have new bolts to install. So we're going to knock these out. Okay, so there's the front, there's the back. Okay, so part of this job that we're doing, these are the tappets, and these are what they call the cuffs. These are the guides that guide the lifter up and down to keep the rollers parallel on the camshafts. They are made out of plastic. I have seen these break, and I have seen these lifters roll sideways on the camshaft already on these Milwaukee 8s. So the whole purpose of this, obviously, is we're going to just do this whole upgrade from S&S. So I'm going to knock these lifter blocks, or the tappet cuffs, out now. 3/8 socket. And this is the tappet cut cuff that's made out of plastic. The tappet cuffs are off. Now we're going to remove the lifters. You can just grab them with a magnet. And there is the factory lifter. You can just grab them with your fingers and pull them out. Okay, so now the lifters are out. So we're going to roll the engine over, and we're going to line up the timing marks. There's a small dimple in the crank gear, and there's a small dimple in the cam gear, and we're going to line those up. right to there, thereabouts. And we have a tool that installs in this that locks the gears in place. Now I can safely remove these two bolts and take the timing chain out. We're going to also remove this tensioner first, and then we can bust these loose. This also leaves the engine in top dead center where we want it. Oop, that's 9/16.
Does that mean you gotta hold it in place with your hand?
Well, I shouldn't have to, but I bumped it. Now we can remove the cam gear and the crank gear. Now we have to remove the cam plate. There are 4 bolts that hold the oil pump in place, so it's the outer perimeter bolts that you remove to remove the cam plate from the bike. And here is our cam plate with the oil pump attached. Okay, so we have the S&S oil pump here. You notice inside we've got these flats that are on each gear. There's 3 sections to the pump. We have to line these up at 12 o'clock. It is extremely important that this is the inside surface of the pump. The inner seal will be being installed here. That goes against the engine case. But you will see inside of here on that flat that there's a relief. That has to go towards the inside of the engine. If for any reason that you take this pump apart for service or adjustment, you need to make sure that you make this inner rotor face this way. Really important when it goes inside to the crankshaft. So this is going to go in just like this. Like this. So we need to put these flats at 12 and 6. They line up. I've talked about how these have to line up. What we're going to do is we're actually going to put this pump in 3 pieces or 2 pieces. So we're going to separate the pump very carefully. We do have the inner O-ring installed that goes against the inside where the pump sits. This just gently comes apart. You will see the inner plate. We will make sure that this is lined up. And if it is a good idea to put some assembly lube in here. I like Torco, really good stuff. Okay, so you need to make sure when you do take the oil pump apart and you put this first half in, that the new O-ring and the inner seal is installed so that we can slide this on to the lower crankshaft.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it's just a little fussy. This is why we take it apart, to roll this around so that we can get in there with that. And then just line up on the flat. It will slide all the way to the back, and it will push into that O-ring where it seats into the inside of the lower port. In the second portion, we will add some assembly lube. We gotta roll this around so that it lines up. Okay, I will mention that these aren't the easiest things to install, obviously. I did have to take the pump apart. I did drop the pump, and I just had to take it back apart, clean it, and I did re-lube it with assembly lube. So we're gonna install this in here on this second plate. Okay, so we've lined this up from 12 to 6. Pump should wiggle right in and we're down. Okay, we're gonna put some assembly lube in our bushings. Make sure that this O-ring is installed into the block, and then we'll slide this on here. Okay, now we're going to install the bolts in the perimeter and in the oil pump, and then I'll show you how to torque this down properly. We're going to put a little Loctite on each of the screws here that go into the oil pump from the cam plate, and then the cam plate screws, the bolts that go in there. And S&S does supply these bolts with the cam and oil pump kit, so you have to use those. So they're going to go into these holes here. I'm putting in the cam plate bolts right now. We've already installed the oil pump bolts into the housing, into the cam plate. So we're going to lightly seat these down. They are going to be on the loose side, but we are going to seat them down. And you can see how they move around on the plate. We want that action because when we do the procedure to set the oil pump, you'll see why in a minute. Just very lightly touch them in the bottoms of their bores. I'm going to rotate the engine twice, making sure that this comes back up to top dead center. So I'm going to roll it around once, twice. Now we're going to put these down to 120 inch-pounds. Now what this procedure does is it centers the oil pump, all of the components inside, the rotors and whatnot. So we're going to torque these. It goes A, B, C, and D. It's 120 inch-pounds. There's A, B, and D. Now we're going to do the same procedure by putting down the perimeter bolts onto the cam plate, and then we will rotate the engine one more time, twice, coming up to top dead center. The O-ring that's behind this plate is going to stand the plate off just a bit. You will feel that go down when you mount the O-rings, tighten the bolts down into their bores. And you just back them off just a skosh because you want this plate to walk around. What we're doing is we're centering this oil pump in here so that it doesn't drag. We don't have any issues with it. You will feel a drag in this pump if there is a problem. And of course, then you'd have to do the procedure all over again. Okay, we're going to rotate this twice. There's one. And two. And it's all numbered for you. The S&S is so great. They've got A, B, C, D here, and then they've got all the numbers that are machined into the cam plate so that you can torque those down to 120 inch-pounds. 1, 2, and 6. Okay, we're going to install the cam gear and the cam chain and the drive gear, and then there's the thrust washer that goes here on the cam. So we're going to drop a little assembly lube on that. Both sides, just coat it really good. Drop that right on there. And then you'll notice that there's a large tooth, like it almost looks like two teeth missing. That large flat goes up against this large, the flat that's in the crankshaft, and you'll see that it matches the gears. And those go like so on there. And you will notice that our two timing marks now line up with the cam and the crank. So we're this engine is back in time. Even though we've rotated it twice without the camshaft being in here, we've put everything back in time. So really great. We're gonna dab a little bit of red Loctite on each of these bolts. This is the cam. This is the crank. These get installed in here. Then we are going to install our tool to lock all of that together. And now we're going to run them down. The lower one is 24 foot-pounds, and the upper one, which is the cam, is 34. You have to remember that foot-pounds and inch-pounds are completely different. So that's 24. Now we'll adjust the torque wrench up to 34. That's 34, we'll lock it in place. 9/16. Okay, remove that, and now we'll install our oil, our hydraulic cam chain tensioner. And these get a little bit of blue Loctite. And these go in at 120 inch-pounds, same as the cam plate and the oil pump. Change sockets, go to the Torx. There we go. Now the cam, chest, plate, oil pump assembly is now complete. We're now going to drop the lifters in the bores. I'm going to take some assembly lube. We're just going to run them down the bores. There's going to be oil on the lifters because I'm going to show you how that we prime the lifters before we install them, so when the bike runs, it starts up for the first time with all this new stuff in there, that it doesn't rattle really bad. So we're going to take the lifters out. These are the S&S premium lifters, and I've taken a little piece of fuel line hose and put it on my oil can, and the cool part is I can push it into the top. This is just 20/50 weight that's run into that we run in the oil or the engine. I run it into the top, and then I go into the oil pressure side of this and see how that oil comes out the top. The lifter is now primed. Now I can drop this lifter in place. The flats of the lifters will face each other in the center line of their bores. Okay. So we're going to install the new S&F tappet cuffs. We'll put a little assembly lube on the bores. They install like this on the flats of the lifters, the tappets. Little blue Loctite on our fasteners. These bolts go down to 100 inch-pounds, and the lifter blocks go down to 120 inch-pounds. No more nasty plastic. Now we'll torque them down in place. All right, so we've installed a new gasket on the tappet block cover. Put that in place. S&S has been so kind to give us brand new nice screws to put these down in. They come with Loctite installed on the threads. We'll run these down with a T-handle. And then we'll do a final torque at 120 inch-pounds. All right, now we're going to finish torquing these up to 120 inch-pounds. Okay, now we can install the cam cover. All right, add a little blue Loctite. And install our cam cover. And these all go down to 120 inch-pounds as well. That was our last one. And now our S&S oil pump, cam plate, lifters, and the cuffs are now installed. So now that we're going to reinstall the push rods, I want to show you how to bring them back down to that bottom part of the lobe so that we can install the push rods and adjust them correctly. This is why we took the spark plugs out and left the biking gear in high gear, 6th gear, so we can roll it over. It's exactly how I took them out. What I do is I place my fingers on the top of the lifter blocks, and as I roll the rear tire, you're going to watch my finger rise. My index finger's coming up right now. And then now it's going to go back down into the bore. Now my middle finger's coming up and then returning back down. And now I am at the bottom of the lobe so I can install the intake and exhaust push rod. A little trick that I do when I'm installing the push rod tubes, obviously I have the O-rings up on the top. I put this lower O-ring up on this side of the tube so that it doesn't get bunged up into the bore and drop it down inside under the push rod. And it's just really easy to roll this down once we're ready to seal the tubes. I'll show you how we do that. So this is going to go, obviously, we'll make sure that the push rod is all the way down so that we can get it up into its bore. You want to feel it go into the rocker arm. You'll feel it stop. And now we start unrolling. Push rod, we start extending the push rod out. So we're lengthening the push rod to make contact with the lifter. There is a flat on the push rod arm that you can, or not the arm, the push rod shaft on this lower shaft that we're threading up. You can grab it with a 5/16 wrench and hold it so you can screw it up into place. Makes it a whole lot easier. Roll the nut up into place as you go. Makes holding the push rod a lot easier. Okay, now we've made contact between the rocker arm and the lifter. And I want to make a note of this. When adjusting these push rods, you set them to 0 lash, which means you want this just to make contact with the lifter. So that, see how I can move this push rod? At 0 lash, it just starts to touch and stop. So we're going to adjust the push rod now. You will see these are Screaming Eagle push rods from Harley. A lot of the adjustable push rods are very similar in design. You will see that there's a small dot on the face, the facet of this upper push rod tube. We're going to adjust this 2.5 turns. The idea behind this is that the lifter has 200 thousandths of travel in the hydraulic portion of the lifter. And what we're doing is, by making this adjustment, we're putting the push rod, or the hydraulic component of the hydraulic lifter, exactly halfway down in the bore so it floats. So 2.5 turns is 100 thousandths on these fine threads. So we're gonna turn this around and you'll just see that dot come back. So there's one turn. There's 2, and then you can count the facets to 3, which will be halfway around. So 1, 2, 3. So our push rod is now adjusted correctly. What I like to do is I like to take a dab of red Loctite and just touch the top part of the thread where the nut is, right there. Just kiss it a little bit, and then run the lock nut up by hand. This will ensure that this push rod won't come loose after we tighten it. This is a little tricky part. You've got to hold the 5/16 wrench and the top wrench while tightening the nut on the push rod. Now what I do is I roll the O-ring to the bottom of the tube, put it down in its bore, and then we take our small screwdriver and we slide the push rod tube up into, there's an O-ring at the top up here. We slide it up into, and then we have our clips. They slide up into place. And take our screwdriver and snap them into place. So that is our first, this is our intake valve. Now we're going to do the exhaust side. By buying these S&S parts and putting them in the bike, you're going to get the reliability out of this thing. You're going to get all the money back that you've invested in not only the bike upfront purchase, but the install price. Doesn't matter if you take it to me, take it to Harley Davidson, take it to your favorite shop. It doesn't matter. What we need to get down here is that there's a problem with the Milwaukee 8. It's going to fail, and there's a way around this. We're going to make this happen. So make that investment. Get those parts in your bike. Listen to my favorite pinup girl and hit that like button. And don't forget, Mr. Happy Beaver says, subscribe!